Hello again, and here we are. Alright, so what we're going to talk about today is what I like to call the Industrial Revolution 2.0. We've already talked about the industrialization that was going on in the United States, starting in the really very late 18th century with Slater's Mill, and then expanding from there. And of course, this industrialization was happening primarily in the North. Now we're going to move it on to a little bit more, and we're going to expand this idea a little bit more. During the Civil War, really, one of the key advantages that the Union had in winning the Civil War was its industrial power. So that meant that there was a tremendous amount of incentive for the government to encourage that kind of industrialization. So, with the availability of greenbacks and contracts going out to industries to help supply and provide weapons for the Union Army, there was a great impetus to build and expand our industrial infrastructure. And so consequently, after the war, we had all of this infrastructure that had already been invested in. And what are we going to do with it? Well, we're going to keep building. I mean, why have a factory just standing there? Well, but at least after the Civil War, we didn't really think about that too much. We wanted to actually do stuff, and we were willing to make the investments to build this industrial infrastructure. So what's going to end up happening is, in the late 19th century, as was the case in much of Europe as well, this is a global phenomenon. We're going to see a great expansion of industrialization happening in the United States. This one might be a bit long. Sorry, guys. It is what it is. Just get some popcorn and hit pause, get some popcorn, come back. We'll continue on. But anyway, this is of course lecture 32. The essential question that we're going to deal with today is we're going to analyze the causes of U.S. industrialization and its influences on urbanization. Of course, this corresponds with Key Concept 6.1 and 6.2 in your AP guide. So we're moving right along. We've got a lot of material to cover in this particular video. So we're going to start off with some of the influences of the Industrial Revolution. What was it about the late 19th century that really spurred industrial growth in the United States? Well, one of those things, of course, was something that we talked about last time, and that was the expansion of the railroads, especially the Transcontinental Railroad. I mean, if you think about it, now for the first time, if you make widgets in New York City, if you can get those widgets onto a railroad, you can actually ship those widgets all the way to Sacramento. This is going to have the effect of expanding markets in the United States. It now becomes, if you had to put your widgets on a wagon train and try to get them to Sacramento, that was going to be very risky and it was going to be too expensive. But putting them on a train, especially in the late 19th century, became a lot safer. Granted, we of course have our images of Jesse James and the train robbers and railroads attacked by Indians and that kind of thing, and that did happen. But especially as the 19th century progressed, the trains became a much safer and cheaper way of, well, I wouldn't necessarily say cheaper, I'm sorry, I'll rewind that, but at least a safer way, and at first a very cheap way of shipping your goods. So we're going to expand our markets. We're also going to expand our demand. A person who's in Sacramento can order a product from New York and get it. So we're expanding demand. We're also expanding demand because someone's going to build the railroads. These railroads have to be built from something, and they're going to be built from steel, and they're going to be built using rubber, and they're going to be built using coal and iron and chromium and wood and all kinds of things. So just the very physical nature of building these railroads is going to expand demand, and it's going to expand industrial demand. Plus, we also need to arm soldiers, especially at first, to protect these railroads from being attacked by Indians, and that's also going to increase demand. Because the railroads were so profitable at this time and were expanding so fast, they become a locus for investment. If I have some extra money to invest, why wouldn't I put it in the railroads? And of course, this is going to spur further advancement and expansion of the railroads, but it's also going to provide opportunities for investment in other places. So, for instance, wherever these railroads would come to a stop would be a really good place to invest in, a donut shop. Whatever, people get off the train, they're going to want donuts, so let's invest in a donut shop. and all of the other things that go along with that. So the railroads become a locus of investment, and also it becomes the railroads are going to help to lower the costs of goods in places that otherwise did not have availability of relatively cheap goods. And as we know about the industrial revolutions tend to decrease the cost of the goods that are being shipped. So now I have, even if I live out in the prairies of Montana, I'm able to get access, but if I live near a railroad, I'm able to get access to goods from all over the country. So the railroads are going to be a huge, huge influence. And also, new innovations in mechanization, new machines are going to be developed that are going to, steam-powered machines that are developed much earlier are going to really come to pass, and new things are going to be done with these machines that are going to allow for much more efficient production. So mechanization is going to increase efficiency, and if it increases efficiency, it's going to reduce costs and increase the profitability of those products. Also, new fuels. The use of anthracite coal. Anthracite coal was a huge step up from earlier versions of coal that was being used. Was a much more efficient. It was really dirty, but we're not going to worry about that form of fuel, which is also going to burn hotter than earlier coals. Also, a new substance is going to be this substance was this substance was a kind of a nuisance. It would seep up out of the ground, create this little black tarry substance that would come out there. But it turns out another component of this was that it tended to catch fire. Well, if it catches fire, you can use it as a fuel. And of course, this is going to be oil, and we're going to see the oil industry start to develop in the later part of the 19th century out of Pennsylvania, where the oil was actually rather considered inconvenient before that. Also, we're going to, if we're going to have these railroads and I have the potential to sell my goods, 2,000 miles away, then I'm going to try to create mechanisms by which to sell those goods. We're going to see with the expansion of the railroads, we're going to see also the expansion of what we would think of now as modern advertising. A modern advertising industry is going to rise up. Professionals who are going to make your products more marketable to people all over the country and find ways of selling it. And consequently, even when I was a kid, of course, before internet pop-up ads, we had these things called retail catalogs, especially coming from Sears and Roebuck. Every few couple of months, my mom would get these big catalogs from Sears and from whatever other retail store that she had, and she could look through the catalog. And there was a little order form, and you could fill out the order form, and you can send it in and get whatever it is that you wanted. I think we talked about this in an earlier lecture, if I'm not mistaken. And using these catalogs, you could order anything from tractors to plowshares to new boots to wives. There was pretty much anything that you wanted that you could get your hands on. And also, something new came about is, because of railroads, if I own a store in New York, hey, I could conceivably open a similar store in Chicago and be able to manage both of those stores. And if I can do that in Chicago, I can do it in Omaha, Nebraska. And if I can do it in Omaha, Nebraska, I can do it in Sacramento, California. So we start to see the development of chain stores, large retail organizations that are going to set up stores in multiple cities all over the country. So, and all of these are going to spur demand and keep influencing industrialization. So as we go along, we also have the development of some interesting new technologies that are going to come about, and of course we know some of these folks. Of course, we have a picture here of Thomas Edison and Alexander Graham Bell, and of course the Wright brothers. But these technologies were really, really important, really significant in the industrialization of the United States. So, for instance, looking at this chart, we can look at our buddy Alexander Graham Bell here. Fascinating guy, fascinating man. He is the guy who invented the telephone. You like your cell phones? Well, that is your great grandpa right there, right? And of course, inventing the cell phone or the telephone was pretty significant. I mean, yeah, we were using the telegraph that had been around for 30 or 40 years, and we were sending messages. But one of the drawbacks of that is, in order to use the telegraph, you had to have somebody who knew how to interpret the little dots and dashes that were coming off the internet. Well, that's really difficult. You have to pay these guys. This is a specialized skill. But with a telephone, all you need to do is be able to hear. And you can interpret what was coming off of the phone. It was a huge, huge benefit of communication, impact of communication, which also made it easier. I mean, if I own a chain store, it makes it easier for me to manage that chain store if I can pick up the phone and say, hey, connect me to my widget store in Chicago, and find out what the manager's doing there and get instant communication without having to go through, a telegraph conductor. Thomas Edison's incandescent light. This was a major invention in and of itself, but also the incandescent light it requires electricity to run it. Now, if we can use electricity to light our homes, that also means that we're going to have to invest in electrical plants that can get the electricity to our homes. And of course, Thomas Edison is going to do just that. He's going to establish his General Electric company and start lighting New York. And of course, that is going to extend from there. We'll think about the advantages that having electric lights, not just electric lights, but electricity at all being pushed into your homes and into your businesses. Businesses can now stay open into the evening. They don't have to shut down at sundown. Also, we can look at some others. Henry Ford was not the inventor of this, but he was certainly an innovator of the internal combustion gas engine. And of course, later in the 20th century, Henry Ford is going to modernize industries and industrialization by creating the mass assembly system, the moving assembly line, in which components come down the assembly line and are put together by people working on that line, which is going to increase efficiency, reduce costs, and make his Model T Ford more affordable, to the masses. Of course, we have the airplane. Let's take a look at the airplane. The airplane is going to, this is not the first time people flew, but we were flying in balloons before. Really hard to steer a balloon and make it go where you want it to go. But an airplane, you can actually make it go against the wind. This is not the first flight, but this is the first controlled flight. And if you can control the flight, now you have a marketable commodity. Now you can use these planes to deliver mail, for instance, and deliver parcels far away. And ultimately, if these planes get bigger, you can actually start carrying passengers. That of course didn't happen right away with Orville and Wilbur Wright, but it created the investment opportunities for the growth of this particular business. The refrigerated railroad car is another important invention, a new technology that's going to come along. Now, using the railroads wasn't just confined to just people who had non-perishable goods. If you were a broccoli farmer, you can now extend your markets by getting your goods into these refrigerated cars and move them further and further away. This is really impressive. But mechanization and these new technologies and industrialization didn't just impact industries and urban centers. They were also used on the farms. What we're going to see, of course, we started with Cyrus Field and John Deere and those guys starting to mechanize farming. But of course, the large agricultural corporations are going to have a lot more investment capital to put into larger and more complex and more comprehensive mechanized processes for bringing in their crops, which means they're going to be able to farm larger plots of land, and they're going to be able to bring in a lot more food a lot cheaper, which also is a benefit to people with less money, because now they're going to be able to afford a broader array of foods. So, I mean, all of this stuff is going to spur industrialization and spur this process. And consequently, hey, one of my favorite things about teaching this particular unit is, of course, my ability to now use charts and graphs. And you guys know how much I love my charts and graphs. I'm a sociologist. I love my charts and graphs. But anyway, if you really take a look at these charts here, what we see is a consequence of industrialization. We actually see some pretty decent and sustained economic growth overall over a relatively long period of time. Both of these charts are showing gross national product between 1869 and 1879. But wait a minute, Mr. Adosho, why are you showing us two graphs of gross national product in 1869 and 1879? Well, it's to demonstrate an important point. We've come up with some really interesting ideas of understanding what's going on around us. One of those is the development of this concept of the gross national product, and the gross domestic product, a way of measuring economically the economic output of our country. Problem. We came up with that in the mid-19th century. So nobody went and kept track of what the gross national product was in the middle of the 19th century. Well, then how did I get this information? Well, I went to people who know how to calculate and estimate gross national product, and based on what they could get together from the information that they had and from the data tables that they did have, they estimated the gross national product between 1869 and 1879. Nobody did it at the time, so this is all secondary sources. The problem is that they are estimates, and if you have estimates, then you have to assume that there's probably some variation and inaccuracies. So what you want to do is you want to make sure that you're looking at least a few sources. I put two here, but I would probably suggest that if you can find more sources in your research, that you do that. In this case, this particular source is by Romer. I didn't actually put the name of the source now, but you get the point here. Romer, who was calculating this in 1989 using $1982, and this one, Balke and Gordon, doing the same thing. Balke and Gordon gets a much more conservative estimate than does Romer, but both of these graphs are showing economic growth during this time period, and in the 70s, we actually see accelerated growth in both of these charts. We can tell that because the slope of the line, increases from the period before. So you see a greater slope in your line. Holy cow, Mr. Adosho, you're talking about math now. Well, yeah. In order to really understand history, you also have to have an understanding of math. So that's what these charts are saying. But of course, this growth is not equally distributed. Not everybody is benefiting, at least not quite in the same way. So what we're starting to see is an expansion of inequality happening in the United States, and this inequality is becoming much more conspicuous. Whereas people who owned the businesses tended to make a lot of money, whereas the people who actually worked in the businesses did not. And this is going to spur inequality. The standard of living overall is going to increase for pretty much everybody, even poor people. If you really think about it, there were poor people who were literally wearing rags and skins before industrialization. And yet after industrialization, we actually see that poor people can afford clothing. Fabrics, which used to be relatively expensive, are now being mass-produced, and they are very, very cheap. And in fact, they're so cheap that people who are not poor just kind of get tired of their clothes, go out and buy new clothes, and then throw their old clothes away. So even very poor people were able to increase their standard of living with the more affordable availability of more affordable food. We see that this is going to increase the standard of living. So the standard of living is going to improve largely for everybody. It is a case where a rising tide does lift all ships. Unfortunately, some of these ships have holes in them, and some of them don't lift quite as high as others. We're going to talk about that in just a moment. We also see some changes going on in the lower classes, in the laboring classes, in which, especially among skilled craftsmen, who are used to creating a product and then selling that product, and they then profit from what they sell and from what they do. They profit from their skill. And that's great, but now in an industrial society, in an industrial system, that's not the case. People come and work in a factory, and it's not a matter of exchanging goods for money. Now it's a matter of exchanging labor for money, and that is called wages. And we see the development of a wage system in which bosses will pay you for a certain amount of time that you work, or B, for a certain amount of productive output that you do. And this wage system was a little bit different for a lot of people, especially farmers coming off of the farms moving into the cities, which we'll talk about in just a moment. This is really this is a huge change in how we make our money, and in working for wages, which of course brings about a certain amount of responsibility. If you're going to make a certain wage, your boss is going to expect you at the factory at a certain time, and he's going to want you to be there for a certain amount of time, and you're going to have to go on break at a certain amount of time, and this kind of system is going to be the industrial system for workers is going to become a lot more regulated and a lot more regimented. Whereas before, if you were in manufacturing, you pretty much took your own hours. You went out and you made a chair. Well, okay, I want to sleep until 9 o'clock today. I'll start my chair at 9:30. Oh, tomorrow I can get up a little earlier and start my chair. It doesn't work like that if you're in a factory. A factory requires a more efficient and predictable, labor, a process of labor and process of production. You can't have that much autonomy. So this is a huge loss of autonomy for American workers. We also start to see growing industrialization taking place in the North, and oftentimes, in the South. And southern states would oftentimes make. Make deals with industries to try to get them to move down. Okay, we'll give you tax breaks. We'll give you land. We'll do what you need. Just come on, move on down, and take advantage of what we have to offer here. So we are going to start to see industrialization starting to grow in the South, but not nearly as much as it was growing up in the North and the Northeast, and what becomes known as the Rust Belt, moving from the Lakes region down into the East. And of course, there were no rules to talk about how you had to treat your workers, and this is going to be a real problem. And I'll let you. I'm not going to, for the sake of time, you can read the secondary source here by David M. Kennedy and Elizabeth Cohen from the American Pageant on your own and see how that works out for you. Here's another interesting little graph here, and this is the distribution of the American workforce between 1870 and 1820. And what you see at the bottom here is hold on, whoops, this is actually switched. Oh, the phone, I'm going to have to go back in and fix this. On your notes, if you've already looked at your notes, this is not correct. These should be switched. So switch these in your notes, and then I'll have to go back and switch them later and do this. But anyway, in 1870, of course this now is 1870, we see that we have much of our workforce is dedicated to agriculture, whereas we see that shrink in 1920. However, one of what we do see here is we see an expansion, all right, in manufacturing and professional services, and especially with this little sliver here. If we're looking at that expansion, what we're seeing here is the development of a larger middle class. And that's what's kind of going on in this chart. You're seeing the shrinking of agricultural work, expansion of industrial manufacturing labor, and also the expansion of a middle class. These others, trade and miscellaneous, the other jobs, they're not really changing all that much. But there's a lot of variation going on here with the rest of this bar. And this is why we know that the United States was an industrial society at this point. That by definition, an industrial society is one in which at least 50% of or more than 50% of your gross domestic product is coming through manufacturing. We're also going to look at a shifting class structure. What this particular graph shows you is how the class structure was shifting at this time. The upper class at this time is going to be pretty much invested in what we'll call corporations. We're going to talk about corporations a little more in depth next lecture. But your upper class at this point, instead of the merchant class and the plantation classes that we talked about before the Civil War, now we're seeing the rise of industrialists and financiers. Industrialists are the people who manufacture, who own the factories and own the means of production. And financiers are the ones who make the investments, the ones who provide the investment capital for these ventures. And both of these groups are doing extremely well in the late 19th century. Many of them were people who had been very poor. People like Andrew Carnegie, whom we'll talk about more in just a moment. These people started out poor, and by the end of the 19th century were phenomenally rich. And here they are hanging out with people who had been rich since the days of George Washington and even before then. And because they were new rich, they are referred to, of course, as the nouveau riche, because, of course, the hoi polloi, the old rich, like to use French to make themselves look more classy, I guess. So they referred to them almost sneeringly as the nouveau riche. Right. But anyway, so there was even a little bit of a class system at the top, right, where the old money kind of looked down on the new money, even though in many cases the new money was a heck of a lot wealthier than the old money. And the core. The foundation of that wealth was a brand new, well, not so much a brand new institution, but an institution that was being used in a much more innovative way in the late 19th century, the corporation. And of course, we'll talk about corporations later on, but the role of the corporation is going to become a locus of investment. Right? If you have this corporation, we know exactly where to funnel our money whenever we want to. It's Friday. I'm sorry. If we have money to invest in, we know where to put the money. And if these corporations are organized, then they become and stable. They become a good investment. And we can pool money into one area and create and build very large factors of production. The corporation is also there to mitigate risk. Of course, the definition of a corporation is a business in which shareholders own the corporation. I'm not taking half of my money and putting it in a business, and if that business fails, I'm out my money. Instead, I'm taking maybe 10% of my money and putting it in a business, and then other people are doing very much the same thing, and therefore, if the business collapses, I'm out my 10%. But I still have the rest of my money. So it's a way of mitigating risk, and it's also a way of organizing work. It's also a way of organizing the factors of production to increase their efficiency and their profitability and to provide cheaper goods and services. So the upper class was doing fairly well. Also, the middle class was doing pretty well. The middle class was expanding during this time in public service jobs. Public service jobs are government jobs. And of course, we're going to find out later that there's going to be a higher demand for people working in the government in an industrial society. There's a lot more things that the state needs to do in these industrial societies, even if they're not all that keen on regulating the industries themselves. We also have the rise of professionals. These corporations oftentimes need people. They're making lots and lots of money, and this money is coming from all different sectors of the country. We need things like accountants. We need people who are specializing in points of law. We need people who can understand the civil engineering and organize the shipments. And these are people who have to have a relatively high level of education and are specific to their field. So we start to see the rise of a professional class. We also realize that in these large factories, we need to have people. We need to have people doing the work, but there's going to be an awful lot of people doing the work. So we're going to have to delegate responsibility. We're going to have to hire people at a higher level to supervise and to manage the people at the lower level who are doing the work. So we're going to start, as a result of the second industrial revolution, we're seeing the rise of a management class, and all of these people are considered middle class. Why? Because these are folks who still need to work for a living. They still need to regiment their lives according to the needs of labor. However, they are people who have enough money set aside. At the end of the day, they can take care of their basic needs and have a surplus. And that's what makes them middle class. And having a surplus means that they have certain opportunities. That there are certain qualities to being a middle class person. For instance, you don't have to work as much. You don't have to work as long, which means you have leisure time. You have time to recreate. And this is going to change American culture. There's going to be a leisure culture that's going to start to develop in the United States that had never really existed before. The middle class also becomes your chief consumers. There's, wealthy people can consume a lot in and of themselves, but there's not as many of them. But there there are a large number and growing number of middle-class people, and if there's a growing number of middle-class people, they are a growing number of people who have disposable income. They have money that they can spend on things, even if they're frivolous things, they can buy them, right? Like pet rocks or whatever, I don't know. But they can do that. So this becomes a locus of consumption, which means it becomes a locus of invention, of investment. So the middle class is also, since you have a surplus of funds, you can actually take some of those funds and invest them yourselves. So middle class become relatively maybe small investors, but investors nonetheless, and that allows for more investment capital. Also, should be a number 4 here, I guess. The middle class is also going to demand higher levels of education, more access to educational opportunities, so that their children can also maintain themselves in the middle class, and even maybe work themselves up into higher classes. So we're going to start to see the middle class is going to demand investment in more public schools and even more higher education, more college opportunities for their children. So now this is running into about 30 minutes, so I'm going to take a break here and go ahead and do what you need to do, go to the bathroom or whatever, and I'm going to start a second video in just a moment.